Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
It's Wednesday afternoon. Perhaps Matt won't be so cranky today after last week's surly episode.
I was irascible, and I was surly, and I was a little. I think there's some weird. The weather's changing, and the race is tightening, and that doesn't make people happy, Bill.
Are you
And I have to
anti-autumn?
say, I tend to like autumn, but it's also ushers in winter, which I hate. So I like autumn if it would stay autumn, but it's like growing old. There's a psychological thing there. A fear of death, I suppose, but maybe that's too deep for the DMZ. Let's go slightly less deep, but still deep. Still deep. I wanted to talk to you about this, Bill. If Trump wins, because we have to grapple with this. We're less than 3 weeks out now, I guess, by the time this airs. It's a tie race, according to Nate Silver, according to a lot of the polls. And it is very possible that Donald Trump, I still, if I'm betting, I'm still betting Kamala, but I think it's possible Trump wins, which means that a convicted felon, a guy who has been found liable for sexual assault, a guy who's been impeached twice, never mind the Access Hollywood stuff, that's old news. A guy who, the latest, of course, Bill, and we'll get to this in a minute, seems to be saying he could use the military to take down the Pelosi's and Adam Schiff. Seems to be saying it pretty clearly, and he's reiterated it 2 days in a row now after having said it this weekend. He could win. And I'm dealing with, like, what does that mean? And Bill, and what do I do? Do I even keep doing this? I'm not going to move to Canada, but I might move somewhere warm. What say you? To the man who literally wrote the book, Don't Move to Canada.
You could move to a U.S. owned Caribbean island.
I think that's not safe. That's not safe, Bill. If you're trying to get away from Trump,
Rico, you think he's gonna cross the water to get you? That's a lot of work.
Yeah, I don't think I'm at the top of his list. I don't think he's coming after me. I'm not important enough. But it does make me wonder, like, do I keep? This is a good gig I got here, Bill. I'm not going to lie. Getting paid. My dad was a prison guard. He literally went to jail for 3 decades so I could get paid to write about politics. It's a nice gig, but it used to be a lot more fun to do. And it's, between the school shootings and the bad guys always getting ahead and winning, it's become a little less fun over the years.
Well, to be a broken record, let's keep in mind that Trump loses more often than he wins. He's only won one election. He did a bad job. Not only lost re-election, but has had bad midterms when he has been the central figure of the Republican Party. And perhaps I should be more emotionally braced for his victory, as you are working on being. I still would give Kamala the edge here. Not only. So I did see earlier that Silver had his projection now exactly 50-50. But I think since then we had a handful of national polls today, which were largely good for Kamala. I just saw Quinnipiac just literally 10 minutes ago put out North Carolina and Georgia numbers. She was actually behind by quite a bit in Georgia, but ahead of North Carolina by 2, which of course people will say that doesn't make any sense. How could this possibly be? But who knows what the right answer is?
Yeah.
I still think the totality
and I saw Joy. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bill.
Sure.
But I will. Take this with a grain of salt because it comes from Joyanne Reed and she doesn't always know what she's talking about. But she made this point, which is, normally it would seem crazy, but in the Trump era, it may be true, that she's saying that all these Republican pollsters are dumping. This has nothing to do with the 7 swing states, but in the national polling averages, that these Republican polling firms are dumping polls showing that Trump is winning. And her assertion is that they're laying the groundwork for people to expect Trump to win so that when he loses, he can claim voter fraud and people will believe him. I don't know if that's too far out there, but again, we live in interesting times.
Trump was saying that the election is rigged at this time of year in 2016. this is what he always does, regardless of what any poll would say. I mean, most of the polls in October of 2016 were very favorable to Hillary Clinton, but he was still saying it was rigged. So I don't think you need to inject funny poll data to give him a thin reed to hold on to. And most of these Republican firms are not showing, Trump blowouts. They're still showing a race within the margin of error, which anything is probably more motivating to Democrats than any other kind of data you could put out there. There's no sense of complacency on the Democratic side. So, and I don't even think the Republican firms are even that wildly different from the other firms that are out there. So I wouldn't make too much of that. I mean, Trump is going to claim fraud no matter what, and we do have to prepare for that scenario. But I don't think the polls are really what's going to. He's not going to say, I was going to say it was rigged, but then these pollsters didn't show up, so no, I'm not. Yeah, I don't think that's what's going to happen here.
Well, it could well be that it's good for Democrats to think it's close, even if it's not. Like maybe Kamala's actually winning by 5, and it's better for Kamala if Democrats believe she's losing by 1. I have to say, Bill, here's one thing I was prescient about. Back in 2012, you might remember that Dick Morris was going on Fox News, basically guaranteeing a Mitt Romney victory. And of course, Mitt Romney did not win in 2012. But a lot of people woke up, a lot of Fox viewers, I'm sure, probably millions, woke up stunned that Romney had lost because they were fully expecting him to win, partly because people like Dick Morris were saying it was going to happen.
The Romney people seem shocked.
And I remember saying at the time, no, they were. Bill, I went to a meeting. Of top conservative movement leaders about 5 days before the election. And the whole purpose of this meeting, it was sort of like Project 25. The whole purpose of this meeting was to plan for how to actually get movement conservatives behind enemy lines into a Romney administration. Sort of as an afterthought, the guy who was hosting the meeting, it was a movement conservative leader, says, oh, by the way, how many people here and this was like halfway through, he's like, does anyone here think that Governor Romney might actually lose? I was literally the only person to raise my hands. And then I remember at the end of it, I won't mention her name, but a prominent conservative leader from the Heritage Foundation came up to me, to her credit, and she was like, why do you think Romney's actually going to lose? And I said, well, have you read Tim Carney's piece today in the Washington Examiner? And she's like, no. And I forget what it was, but I told her, and she's like, oh my, I'm really concerned now. Tim Carney usually gets it right. I'm like, yeah, he kind of does. Those of us who were paying attention thought that, I wasn't 100% sure, but I thought Obama was going to win. But I'm telling you, there were a lot of conservatives convinced Romney was going to win. And at the time, I wrote a piece saying, what Dick Morris is doing is dangerous, because if a whole bunch of people are convinced that their person's going to win, and then they wake up and he hasn't won, that's going to shock them.
Oh,
and it could lead to all sorts of negative externalities.
Like we already know what happens when Trump loses. Literal insurrection. And that's when the polling was, very much in Biden's favor. I'm sure that you're going to see some Trumpers really blow some fuses if he loses. And, that's it. It was challenging in 2020, but we did survive it. And I think we will survive whatever is thrown at us, in 2024. But yeah, I particularly on social media, Elon Musk's social media, the echo chamber there is insane. There's definitely a whole bunch of posts out there trying to tell you that every little morsel of data means a Republican blowout is coming. And one thing that I am curious about, I can't remember if I mentioned this on the last show or not. Nate Cohn's written about this in part, how a lot of pollsters are using past vote recall to weight the data. So you ask, who did you vote for in 2020? And it's a way to try to avoid missing Trump voters. So if you get a sample where it's skewed more towards Biden, you then beef up, your Trump numbers to even it out, and you try to essentially.
Yeah. And this is being done to correct for past problems, where the last two elections, correct me if I'm wrong, we've undercounted. Yeah.
That's the intent. But and if you're you're futzing your dials to say, okay, I'm going to match the 2020 result in pass vote recall, that's an assumption that your 2024 electorate is going to resemble your 2020 electorate, and it might not. And something else that I've seen less discussion
Right.
of, because I think it's become so commonplace, is the use of party affiliation as a weighting metric. If you go back 10 years or so ago, pre-Trump, that was more frowned upon because, I mean, things like, pretty much that an electorate's going to be roughly 53% women, 47% men. That's very consistent over elections. You can know roughly what the African American percentage is going to be, what the Latino percentage is going to be. Those numbers are fairly constant, or you can make slight adjustments based on new census data. You do run the risk of, turnout bust or booms, but you got a pretty good sense of where the electorate is there. But it's like party affiliation. Well, people change their minds. I mean, elections are not static things. Some people might feel Republican one day and be mad about something, be a Democrat the next, or vice versa. And it doesn't even necessarily have to track your party registration. I was just looking at the Pennsylvania numbers historically. They're one of the states that actually tracks that data, and not every state does that. So the Democratic share of voter registration over the last several elections has generally been higher than the number of people who say to the exit pollsters, I am a Democrat. You might be mad about Democrats and say I'm an independent, but even though you might still end up leaning Democrat in your voting pattern, and it's the same with Republicans. So those numbers don't perfectly track. So if you're going to make an assumption about the partisan makeup of the electorate based on the last election, well, maybe this election is a different election. And so if Kamala is, doing better than the polls say, it may be because they were presuming a certain partisan makeup of the electorate that proved not to be true, either because there was a turnout boom on the Democratic side, a turnout bust on the Republican side, or just a change in sentiment amongst independents matter. Independents exist. We seem to kind of forget about them. But there are actually very large swings in independent sentiment, and maybe because not just individual voters change their minds, but how voters describe themselves shift depending on circumstances. Biden won independents by 9 points nationally in 2020, whereas Trump won them by 1 point in 2016. That's a pretty big difference, and we don't know how that's going to go this time around.
Yeah, look, it's a long way of saying we don't know if the polls are right. They're probably not right, but we don't know how they're wrong, and because they're making assumptions about turnout and things, and they're doing their best, most of them, but we see through a glass darkly. We have 3 weeks to go. Let me just say, I don't want to be too navel-gazy here, Bill, but just to wrap up where I started, I'm not going to take my ball and go home or something like that. But I will say, if Trump wins, I mean, I'm probably going to reevaluate what I do and, what this is all for and what it's worth. And I'm sure I'll still, do stuff. But I think everyone does. I think that I'm sure that if you were just to look at the types of people and who was in this business 5-10 years ago, it has changed. I think that Donald Trump has run people out of this industry and brought in new, different, and in some cases worse people. But it's a toxic environment in some ways, especially if the bad guys keep winning all the time, and especially since and I'm a conservative on so many things, and I'm not a huge philosophically, I'm not in line with the Democrats, but all the stuff Donald Trump has done and said, Stormy Daniels, paying off porn stuff, we can go down the list. And then Democrats kicked out their nominee and replaced him with someone else. And if all that isn't enough and America really wants Donald Trump, it's going to make me, I'm going to have to reevaluate a lot of stuff. What do I even think about my fellow Americans? I mean, you could be at the grocery store, comparing melons with someone, and they could be a Trump voter, Bill.
Well,
scary.
I do want to be, we all want to be careful not to make analyses based on vibes. We want to be as data oriented as we can. We don't want to tell ourselves things to make us feel better when they may not be true. And we all obviously have the experience of 2016 where both polling and common sense would tell you that Hillary was going to win, even though Trump was improving in the last batch of polls. Your sense of inner decency would say, okay, well, he's doing a little bit better, but come on, no one's really going to do this. No one's really, when they get in the polling booth, they're not really going to go for Trump. That's crazy. And of course, most people didn't, but just enough did in the right states. So I do want to stop myself from just like landing there as a final place. But when I combine,
and I think Bill, we should do our traditional predictions.
Just so we can embarrass ourselves
the week before the election. Well, no, I think it's so you can embarrass yourself, because I have to say, I think my predictions have been fairly good.
I was
fairly good. Now,
I was good in 2020.
I actually, yeah, you were good one year. I had Hillary winning in 2016 very narrowly, and do you know why? It was like I had it like a tie, and I'm like, I'm just going to give Hillary the edge based on the fact that she probably has a turnout machine and he doesn't. She has an infrastructure, he doesn't. That alone, I gave her the slightest edge. But I still think we should do our predictions and throw them out there for the people to see and to mock later, actually. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I have not made final predictions yet. I haven't gone down state by state. It's a little early for that. But I do think we have a combination of things that favor Kamala. So one is she still maintains a lead in national polling, 2-3 points. Obviously, that makes things a little dicey in the Electoral College, but I think that will be enough. We have the economic fundamentals, I think, are in her favor, if slightly. Obviously, some people are still grumpy about inflation overhang, but as I've said before, when you have growing GDP, low unemployment, wages beating inflation for over a year, inflation has been trending down, even going into these final weeks. You don't see incumbent parties lose in that environment historically. So I think that does work in her favor. Even the things that Trump wants to enrage people over, like immigration, those numbers have gone way down since the Biden executive order went into place. So you're not seeing even the thing they tried to make into a big thing, Springfield, Ohio, has been debunked so many times that you're not seeing a spate of stories across America. Oh, here, this is your Springfield and your Springfield and your Springfield. That's not happening. So they don't really have the fodder to make this into a conflagration of an issue. And you just mentioned infrastructure, but we thought Hillary had the better infrastructure. I think the evidence of the ground game mismatch here is very thorough. We've seen about a dozen stories about how Trump has really screwed this up. And in close races, I would give Kamala the edge there. And just in candidate performance, I don't know if you listened to the interviews yesterday, Trump with Bloomberg and Kamala with Charlemagne the God. And Charlemagne even asked her, people say you're too scripted, and she was like, "You're welcome. I'm a disciplined candidate. That's how I should be. I'm not a crazy person going off on weird tangents. I'm not all of a sudden like playing multiple versions of Ave Maria instead of answering questions at a town hall." I don't think.
Yeah. No, that was weird, Bill. Didn't he? Trump played like I don't know how long, like 45 minutes worth of music.
Did you watch the whole thing?
It's crazy.
Did you actually watch it?
No, but I saw clips. It's insane.
I didn't watch the entire 40 minutes, but I did watch large chunks. Because the clips don't fully give you the maximum weirdness involved. Because you have people who were collapsing from the heat, and I mean, it's understandable he would stop the town hall temporarily for the medical professionals to deal with that. But then you might say, can we shut down this event and let people leave instead of let's joke about fainting in the heat and saying we don't care about the heat, or it's just we can't turn the air conditioning on because it's too expensive. And by the way, let's play a lot of weird songs. That none of that makes any sense at all. And I think I got a lot of media attention that this weird thing was happening. I just think Trump is acting weirder. Like I think in 2016, Trump was kind of tightening things up. Whereas he seems to be kind of getting stranger and stranger as we go along.
Yeah.
And whereas Kamala,
At the end. Yeah.
every bar you set for Kamala, oh, she's an idiot, she's a moron, she can't handle this interview or that interview, and then she does them, and you're like, you know what, that was fine. So I just think the candidate quality here is a real mismatch. I mean, her favorability numbers are much better than Hillary Clinton's was. Hillary was always running uphill based on decades of being slandered. And Kamala doesn't have that same issue. So I see a lot of things are in Kamala's favor right now.
Okay, I want to turn to something, maybe we can keep it short today, but you made a really interesting point, Bill, and we referenced at the top of the show this line that Donald Trump had, I guess it was on Fox Business with Maria Bartiromo, where he talked about how the enemy from within is more dangerous than like Russia and China. But the enemy from within, and he includes amongst the enemy from within, Adam Schiff and the Pelosi's, that they're more dangerous and they may need to be dealt with by the National Guard and possibly the military. That's, I mean, he's reiterated this, and other people like Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin have tried to clean it up and say, well, what he really means is no. That's what Donald Trump is saying. But so, yeah, and Vance does that same cleanup on aisle 7 shtick. You made a really interesting point, which is, speaking of Hillary Clinton, when Hillary Clinton said that, there's some portion of voters out there, some portion of Trump voters are a basket of deplorables that are irredeemable. Like you can't get them to vote any other way. That was just universally criticized. Like, how dare you say what you will about Trump, but how dare you attack his voters? And you're not going to win people over by calling them all deplorables. She didn't, but you're not going to do that. And she was, I think, chastised by everybody. And it was really, her loss was, that's one of the things people talk about James Comey, people talk about deplorables. And you made the point, Bill, that what Trump just did comes pretty close to replicating the deplorables comment.
Well, because he's making disparaging comments about broad swaths of voters. I mean, Trump's quote was, I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen. And that was a question about what outside agitators, quote unquote, might do on election day. So it's like it was.
Let me play you what he was asked. He was on Harris Faulkner, and he reiterated. Let me play this clip real quick where he reiterates. He's asked about that line, and he reiterates it. Let's go.
And it is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I use a guy like Adam Schiff because they made up the Russia hoax. It took 2 years to solve the problem. Absolutely nothing was done wrong, et cetera, et cetera. They're dangerous for our country. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. The more difficult are, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick and they're so evil. If they would.
I think one danger for Democrats is there's a perception, because he mentions Schiff and the Pelosi's, there's a sense that Trump is just going after the elites, not regular rank and file voters. And so maybe that's the difference between that and the deplorables.
Well, the first comment, what you just played was from this town hall he did on Fox News on Tuesday. The original comment was made on Fox News over the weekend in a different interview. And as I said, he first talked about radical left lunatics. And that wasn't a comment about individual politicians. And so it's sort of a converse of what you're saying. Maybe you think, oh, he's not talking about me. He's not talking about me, average Democrat. He's talking about, some extreme, pro-Hamas protester or someone like that. So it's a very tiny group of people. And then he says, no, I mean Adam Schiff. I speak like a regular old Democrat, Adam Schiff. To your point, maybe they're saying, well, it's still not me. It's either elected politicians or protesters. But I think when you bring in someone like Schiff or Pelosi, you're talking a mainstream Democrat. Well, I know mainstream Democrats. I know people who vote for these people. Now it's not like this fringe group anymore. And so, Hillary's comment was, unfortunately for her, very specific. She had said, I'm
and
quoting her here,
Mitt Romney had a similar. Mitt Romney had the
with
47%,
47%
that
and
also,
and got really pilloried for it. It's not a safe place to be making characterizations, let alone criticisms, of broad swath of voters, because voters might think, oh, you are talking about me. I mean, every time Trump is indicted, the Trump response is, they're coming after you. It's like, no, I indicted this one guy, I didn't indict 40 million people. But they try to play that card with the thinnest of reeds. I think it's easier for Democrats to say, if you think Donald Trump is not going to want to chill your speech or take away your freedom, we already know what he wants to do to women's freedoms. He's already done that. He's already talking about the enemy within for just average Democrats. So, and there's actually a John Bolton quote from yesterday on CNN where he was asked about this. He was like, "Yeah, don't think it's just going to be Democrats who get attacked by the Trump administration. Plenty of people like me, plenty of Republicans in his administration could have the Justice Department investigate them or prosecute them because he knows no bounds." So we have other testimony here to help broaden it. But Hillary Clinton said, just to be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call a basket of deplorables, right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that, and he has lifted them up. He has given voice to their websites that used to only have 11,000 people, now have 11 million. He tweets and retweets offensive, hateful, mean-spirited rhetoric. Now, some of those folks, they're irredeemable, but thankfully they're not America. That other basket of people who feel the government has let them down, nobody cares about them, nobody worries about what happens to their lives and their futures, and they're just desperate for change. They don't buy everything he says, but he seems to hold out some hope that their lives will be different. These are the people we have to understand and empathize with as well. So she's trying. She's trying to say, don't call them all racists, but she does it in a very ham-fisted way. And again, the latter part gets shorn off and it gets shoved down her throat. And Obama, 8 years prior to that, he was Hillary's comment was at a fundraiser. This was also Obama was talking at a fundraiser. He said, you go into these small towns in Pennsylvania, and like a lot of small towns in the Midwest, the jobs have been gone for 25 years, and nothing's replaced them. And they fell through the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, and each successive administration has said that somehow these communities are going to regenerate, and they have not. And it's not surprising then that they get bitter and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. Again, he's trying to be sympathetic. He's trying to say, don't write these people off, but you can clip it and it sounds condescending.
I'm less forgiving of that one because he puts religion in the same category as guns and racism. It's like that one. I think that's actually a worse, much worse than what Hillary actually said. If you actually read the full,
I'm
text.
sure that was a case where he didn't know he was being taped. It was at a private fundraiser. Someone was surreptitiously taping. I'm sure, if he stopped to think about it, because Obama, generally speaking, is a more careful person, he probably would have defined that more precisely and not just religion broadly. But it's still, both cases were, garbled attempts to try to say, hey, don't just write everybody off as a racist. It's more complicated than that. And they got screwed because it's just not a good idea as a politician to play amateur pundit, amateur sociologist, amateur political scientist. Just don't characterize voters. Just don't do it. And if you watch Kamala,
leave that to the professionals.
Howard Stern asked Kamala, do you think people just won't vote for you because you're a woman? She does not take that bait. She has learned the lesson. She's not going to say, oh yeah, some voters are sexist. That is not going to escape her lips. She just said, I've been the first in everything, and I find that men and women support women in leadership. Get out of it. When Charlemagne the God tried to say, why is Obama is scolding black men for not voting for you? Who's going to scold the white women? Why isn't Liz Cheney and Nancy Pelosi scolding the white women? She just let that go. Not going to engage. She knows that lesson, and so here's Trump saying, again, you can try to retcon it and say, well, he wasn't talking about you, or you, but one could very easily interpret that he could mean me when he talks about the enemy from within, and maybe I will get prosecuted, investigated, military, National Guard show up at my doorstep. You can try to say, well, he doesn't mean it.
What Trump said is actually much worse, actually. Because it's one thing for an elite politician to look down their nose at you. It's another for them to have you dealt with by the military.
Right.
And yet there seems to be this difference between, Hillary Clinton's gaffe was treated so much, as such a big deal compared. I just think we're our outrage receptors have been burned out with Trump. And so it's hard to get worked up when he says crazy, horrible things constantly. And so now he gets away with it, and it's not a big deal because it's not a big deal.
Well, I hear that so much. He always gets away with it. You don't know that he's gotten away with it yet. We have an election. It's
the polls suggest he has.
Well, the polls suggest he's going to lose by a little bit. If you want to take it totally at face value, it'll be exceedingly close. A lot of people will give him a pass,
Bill,
but not everybody.
This guy has been convicted of how many counts? 34 felony counts. He's been found liable for sexual assault. He has been impeached twice. He paid off a porn star. He says you can grab women by their privates, and he's the Republican nominee, and he's tied for a race for president in 3 weeks.
Based on how
is that not a problem for you?
That's based on how pollsters are weighing their data. Let's see how people actually vote.
That's all we have.
Before conclude, well, we in a few weeks we'll do a bit more, and I have no idea.
Yes, but you know what this is like? This is like the time that someone said to Judge Harold T. Stone on Night Court, "Judge not, lest he be judged," and he says, "The kind of puts a crimp in the job description. We're pundits. Of course, in 3 weeks we're going to know, but we have to talk about it today."
What I'm trying to say is, I obviously we are a very siloed country. People don't absorb media the same way. Just because you see something on CNN doesn't mean everybody sees it. I understand that. I am struck by how much the enemy within comment and the weird dancing did become pretty big stories on CNN, on MSNBC. I have been listening to the late night monologues when I do my dog walk at the end of the night. I can usually get the late monologues on YouTube. And I know, Kimmel and Colbert, obviously they're diehard anti-Trumps. I know they're not Jay Leno, Johnny Carson figures, but it's still not traditional news. And so I am curious to what extent this gets out to people more broadly than the CNN watchers. And all that stuff that we talked about is part of their monologues every night. And so I just don't think we know yet to what extent these things just happened a couple of days ago. Polls that came out today aren't going to account for that. And we don't know what it's going to do to, turnout patterns and the like. So
yeah,
it just seems to me.
I mean, look, it's Schrodinger's campaign. Like, if you told me that Kamala runs the table and wins all 7 swing states, I'd be like, that's possible. If you told me that Trump's going to win the popular vote, I'd be like, okay, maybe. Like, there's a lot of range here. I wouldn't be surprised if either one of them wins. If I had to bet, I'd bet on Kamala, but we see through a glass darkly. And I think maybe that's really the theme of this show, which is we don't know, because all we have to go by are these polls. And these polls are never exactly right.
Let me make one other point, which again, these media kerfuffles may not have any bearing on the final outcome, and maybe much more about just economic fundamentals, and all this stuff is sideshow. But I did find it interesting that there was this organized hit on Kamala Harris on plagiarism, led by Christopher Rufo, who is sort of very transparent about trying to level hits on. He played plagiarism cards on the president of Harvard and knocked her out of her position. And so he had a study done of Kamala's book, Smart on Crime, which came out 15 years ago, found some passages that looked like cut and paste jobs from Wikipedia or from think tank reports, apparently some of these things actually were footnoted, but weren't quoted, and didn't quite say in the text like where the exact language came from. So a little sloppy. But this did not get that much media attention, not nearly what I've seen on Trump's DJing and the enemy within comments. And I feel like the media 8 years ago, in the Hillary days, you might have had like a week-long news cycle about Hillary's plagiarism if that came out. And in this case, the New York Times did a piece on it, but they had a quote from a plagiarism expert that said, when I look at this initially, this doesn't seem like, this seems like small potatoes. And it's got kind of pushed down on the priority list of news coverage and didn't really become a thing that happened. Now, I'm sure the Republicans are going to say, aha, media bias. This shows that they're in the tank for the Democrats. But I do think things like that have been a bigger problem for Democrats in the past. And just the things that Trump does are so much more outrageous that they naturally attract more attention. And if this is close, and if there are people still making up their minds, maybe this stuff actually is going to make a difference at the end of the day.
Talk me down, Bill. Talk me down. Okay. Final, anything else? Final
Well, I have a column.
Plugs. What do you want to plug?
Well, I got a column coming out today about I'm generally pretty impressed with the Harris campaign. I'm not a big quibbler, and I don't like being a peanut gallery kind of guy. Say, well, you should do this, and you should do that, because it's always harder than it looks from the outside. But I did write up a quibble because the Democrats are running an ad campaign trying to tell people not to vote for the Green Party candidate because that person will be a spoiler. And if you notice, Matt, I'm not going to say that person's name because I was trying to communicate the point in this column that this person should be ignored by Democrats, not frontally attacked, because unlike Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who did have high poll numbers, and there was some justification in going at him because he was initially not just doing well overall, but had a lot of support from nominal Democrats. Once they laid into him and exposed him, the numbers from Democrats went way down, and he became more like a spoiler for Trump. And that's when Kennedy said, I'm going to get out of here and just endorse Trump because that's what I really want to do. That's what I really want to see happen. So that made some sense. The Green Party candidate is, I think, the most media coverage she has gotten in this whole campaign is coverage of this ad campaign by Democrats. And I think her numbers really...
Is this Liz Smith? Is Liz Smith leading the charge on this one?
Well, she was hired to run point for sort of an anti-third-party effort, period. I don't know if she's behind this particular ad campaign or not. I mean, the DNC chair promoted it on his X feed, and the ad says it's DNC authorized by the Harris for President campaign. So it's not just one person's brainchild, I would think. But the Green Party candidate is running about 1% in the polls, and history says that even that's going to be higher than what the actual number is going to be. And you can't assume that every single one of those votes would transfer to a Democrat, because there's evidence to say that probably more than half of that number, which people just wouldn't vote at all if they didn't have that choice on the ballot. And it's already so tiny as it is. So I would think silent treatment's the way to go here. And that's my argument in the column.
That sounds like good advice to me. Curious why they've decided to do this. Maybe we'll find out.
Well, PTSD.
If you know, let us know. Email us. Yeah. Tweet us. Leave a comment. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. Wet our beaks. Bill Scher. Patreon.com/Bill Scher. Patreon.com/Matt Lewis. Bill, I feel better. I feel like I got some stuff. I worked some things out. Got some things off the chest.
I try to help, or I've set you up for ruin, 3 weeks from now.
Even if I get out of the punditry business, this will still be a weekly therapy session. We just don't talk politics, but we'll still do this show. So don't worry, people.
All right.
Don't worry. We'll still do this show. All right. Well, we'll see you back here next week in the DMZ.
Take care.